This is a CBS News special report. I'm Jim Axelrod at CBS News headquarters in New York. President Barack Obama is in Rancho Mirage, California, and about to make a statement on the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. Scalia, who was 79 years old, the longest-serving justice of the current Supreme Court and its conservative anchor, served on the court for 30 years, having been nominated by Ronald Reagan in 1986. Justice Scalia had been staying at a resort in West Texas when he didn't come down to breakfast this morning. His room was checked and his body was discovered. Tonight, Chief Justice John Roberts called Scalia, quote, an extraordinary individual and jurist, admired and treasured by his colleagues. Let's bring in our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford. Jan, no exaggeration to say the ground is shaking in Washington.
Oh, no exaggeration in Washington and throughout the country. I mean, this is a complete shock. I spoke with people who had lunch with Justice Scalia just a few days ago when he was up in New York, and they said he was absolutely fine. He was joking. He was jovial. No indication at all that anything was wrong. So this comes as a complete shock. Obviously, he's 79 years old, was going to be turning 80, but, you know, he was so full of life. I mean, even on the bench and his writings, he was just someone that seized life, and you could see it. So this, again, coming as a complete shock. And, of course, the landscape here in Washington, the Supreme Court now in the balance, and the presidential election all up in the air at this point with this news.
And already there have been calls from some prominent Republicans to delay, the president delay nominating anyone until the election is settled and let the next president make that nomination. Of course, we're going to hear from President Obama in just a few seconds to get a little bit more on what his intentions are. But that kind of call you're already hearing, right, Jan?
Well, sure. I mean, the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has already said the next president should be able to get to make this important decision. And the president has always complained about what he says is an obstructionist Congress. But, I mean, I think I would say you ain't seen nothing yet.
Jan, let me just cut you off. Here's the President of the United States.
Good evening, everybody. For almost 30 years, Justice Antonin Nino Scalia was a larger-than-life president on the bench. A brilliant legal mind with an energetic style, incisive wit, and colorful opinions. He influenced a generation of judges, lawyers, and students, and profoundly shaped the legal landscape. He will no doubt be remembered as one of the most consequential judges and thinkers to serve on the Supreme Court. Justice Scalia dedicated his life to the cornerstone of our democracy, the rule of law. Tonight, we honor his extraordinary service to our nation and remember one of the towering legal figures of our time. Antonin Scalia was born in Trenton, New Jersey, to an Italian immigrant family. After graduating from Georgetown University and Harvard Law School, he worked at a law firm and taught law before entering a life of public service. He rose from Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel to the judge on the D.C. Circuit Court to Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. A devout Catholic, he was a proud father of 9 children and grandfather to many loving grandchildren. Justice Scalia was both an avid hunter and an opera lover, a passion for music that he shared with his dear colleague and friend, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Michelle and I were proud to welcome him to the White House, including in 2012 for a state dinner for Prime Minister David Cameron. And tonight, we join his fellow justices in mourning this remarkable man. Obviously, today is a time to remember Justice Scalia's legacy. I plan to fulfill my constitutional responsibilities to nominate a successor in due time. There will be plenty of time for me to do so and for the Senate to fulfill its responsibility to give that person a fair hearing and a timely vote. These are responsibilities that I take seriously, as should everyone. They're bigger than any one party. They are about our democracy. They're about the institution to which Justice Scalia dedicated his professional life and making sure it continues to function as the beacon of justice that our founders envisioned. But at this moment, we most of all want to think about his family, And Michelle and I join the nation in sending our deepest sympathies to Justice Scalia's wife, Maureen, and their loving family, a beautiful symbol of a life well lived. We thank them for sharing Justice Scalia with our country. God bless them all, and God bless the United States of America.
President Barack Obama, who is making a statement in Rancho Mirage, California, on the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, calling the justice a man who profoundly shaped the legal landscape, celebrating his extraordinary service to our nation. A remarkable man, the president called Justice Scalia. But the headline that we just heard is that the president was very clear about saying he intends to honor his constitutional responsibility and nominate a successor to Justice Scalia, and he expects the Senate, the Republican Senate, to honor its responsibility and give it a timely hearing and a vote. Let's call in our chief legal correspondent, Jan Crawford, right now. Jan, what did you hear in the president's remarks?
Well, I mean, in addition, of course, to his tribute to Justice Scalia, who really is a conservative icon and towering legal figure, as he mentioned, who has a tremendous impact on the development of American law and, by extension, everyday life. I thought what was most interesting is when he's looking forward to say he is going to be, as we would expect, sending up a nominee to replace him to the Senate. He called for a fair hearing and a timely vote. Now, of course, the Constitution gives the president the power to put justices on the Supreme Court with the advice, as the Constitution says, that the Senate will advise and consent. So the question is now, what is the Senate going to do? And already we've seen from leading Senate figures, including the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, that the next president should be able to make this important decision. So the question now will be, when the president does send up this nominee, which he said he will be doing in due time, what does the Senate do, that Judiciary Committee, which is, of course, controlled by Republicans? Already you've seen them signal that they will be moving to oppose President Obama's nominee before they, of course, even know who that is going to be, which would mean that the Supreme Court could go without a vacancy, could go without that ninth justice, keep that vacancy for the next year until the next president is put into the White House. Now, there is precedent for the court being with a court of 8 justices. When President Reagan, for example, nominated Robert Bork back in 1987, the seat to replace Justice Lewis Powell went unfilled for 7 months. Senate Democrats, of course, blocked the nomination of Robert Bork. The president's next nominee had to withdraw. Then he finally was able to get Justice Anthony Kennedy confirmed, his 3rd try. But that took about 7 months to do that. So you're going to hear Republicans kind of looking back and talking about that there is precedent for this and with something so important. And keep in mind, for Republicans, this is the crucial 5th vote. The court is now composed of really 5 conservatives, or was composed of 5 conservatives and 4 liberals. And now with Justice Scalia's passing, that is 4-4. The court is in the balance. And of course, Justice Scalia not only provided the crucial 5th vote, but he was that sharp conservative voice, kind of that anchor for that court. So I think it's going to be very difficult to see Republicans agreeing with anyone that this president puts up. And of course, he's complained that Republicans are obstructionist. As I was saying before his remarks started, I don't think he's seen anything yet, because this is the battle. Republicans are ready to dig in for this battle. They see it as affecting nothing less than the future of America. The Supreme Court is a president's most lasting legacy. Long after the president is out of the White House, those justices are on that Supreme Court deciding cases that have enormous impact on everyday life, whether it's at work or in your personal relationships. Just this term, for example, they've got cases on affirmative action, on abortion, on labor unions, on the future of the president's health care law. That's back up at the court this year. So every year, these justices deciding these crucial questions. And so with so much at stake, I think Republicans, what we've seen so far, are united that they're going to dig their heels in on this one and point back to when Democrats have done the same thing.
And in terms of setting the landscape, as we're assessing this, some important numbers here. Remember, it takes 3/5 of the Senate to confirm. Right now, there's 54 Republican senators, so Democrats would have to peel off 14 of those. If the Republicans stay united, it really appears as though President Obama's nominee would have quite the uphill climb.
And this, of course, raises the question, and the White House already has nominees that they've been looking at in case, I mean, all White House, every president would do this, every administration. They would have potential nominees ready to go in the event of some kind of surprise retirement, or in this case, a death. So they will be looking now for the nominee that would be most amenable to Republicans in the Senate, probably a moderate Republican, perhaps a sitting judge, someone who's already vetted, or even perhaps a member of the United States Senate. That's someone that people could see maybe making it harder for Republicans to oppose. And some of those senators, as you know, are lawyers. I mean, Senator Amy Klobuchar is often mentioned as someone who might have been a Supreme Court nominee. So it's going to be, Jim, I mean, when you talk about unprecedented fights, it's this in Washington now. It's the backdrop of a presidential campaign. The battle, I think, that we're about to see over the replacement for this towering conservative giant is really something that none of us has seen.
So, Jan, he was very fond of saying he didn't care about his legacy. But now it's time to assess the legacy. So from where you're sitting, when you think about cases that Justice Scalia ruled on, such as Bush v. Gore in 2000, where do you, how do you assess his legacy, and what are the most important cases that history will remember about Justice Scalia?
I think his biggest contribution to American law is his conservative voice. Justice Scalia changed the way that people and conservatives look at the Constitution, the way they interpret the Constitution. You know, he wrote a lot of dissents, and he was often alone in even his opinions. He may have other conservatives who agreed with the outcome, but they didn't always agree with, you know, what he wanted to do to get there. So you don't see Scalia's name on a lot of the big landmark decisions because he could never get four other justices to kind of go along with them. I mean, obviously there was the big Second Amendment case when he held that the Second Amendment guaranteed an individual right to bear arms. But his greatest impact on the law and on this court is sticking to conservative principles on how to interpret the Constitution. He began talking about this as a law professor and in his writings as a federal appeals court judge, and then on that Supreme Court, talking about the conservative jurisprudence known as conservatives and legal scholars call it originalism. When you look at the text of the Constitution and what the framers were doing when they were writing that document, he would always say it wasn't up to judges, unelected judges, to go back and try to rewrite what those framers wrote. You know, he would often talk about the Constitution's a dead document, that unelected judges should not be able to reinvent or invent new rights that weren't in what that document and those amendments to that Constitution said, that those were jobs for the legislature, because if the voters don't like it, they can vote them out. So he was really a kind of this great proponent of judicial restraint and kind of keeping judges in their lane and keeping the legislators in their lane. And that, I think, is his greatest contribution. Really his development of conservative jurisprudence, which kind of ripples across all of the legal landscape.
Jim, we just have about a minute left. We've been hearing about what his intellectual underpinnings, but you're going to tell us now a little bit more about what kind of guy he was, what kind of man he was, because you knew him quite well. We're hearing about how Justice Ginsburg and Kagan, while they were intellectually at the opposite end of the polar extreme from Justice Scalia, that they cared about him and they thought a lot of him as a man. What can you tell us about what kind of guy he was?
Well, this is the great kind of contradiction of Justice Scalia. You see him in his writings, and you would hear about what he would say on the bench and in his speeches, and he sounds so combative. But actually, in his personal relationships, he was beloved on that Supreme Court. And he would say, I may argue with the position and hate the position that the person is taking, but I don't hate the person. And so he developed an incredibly close relationship with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is probably the court's most, staunchest liberal. They would celebrate New Year's Eve together with their spouses. They would go on trips together. They were very close, very fond of one another. And also Justice Kagan, good friend with her.
Judge Antonin Scalia, dead tonight at the age of 79. Justice Scalia's death is expected to change the tone of tonight's Republican debate in South Carolina. CBS News is hosting the debate that will begin moments from now at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's 8 Central and 6 p.m. in the West. President Obama, just a few minutes ago, calling Justice Scalia a remarkable man and praising his service as a jurist and as a legal scholar. For now, I'm Jim Axelrod, CBS News in New York. We're going to join the debate in South Carolina on the West Coast regular programming. Thank you.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.